So I've been in the medical profession now for over 20 years, and I've witnessed firsthand the rising tide of all chronic diseases, but particularly dementia. What's truly alarming is that this isn't just happening to older people anymore. I actually recently just saw a patient whose 45-year-old husband, 45, had just been diagnosed with early onset dementia. It was heartbreaking seeing how it was impacting this patient, and she didn't even have the diagnosis. Watching someone lose their memory, their sense of self, and their ability to connect with loved ones at such a young age is truly devastating. This topic is especially close to my heart because my grandmother had dementia. I saw firsthand how it affected her and, of course, our family, including myself. It's a cruel, vicious disease. And let's be honest, it's something that everybody fears because it just has no safety net. But what's causing dementia rates to go up and up and up? Almost certainly, there's many factors at play. But today, I'm going to explore something that you might not actually expect that linked with dementia. And that's glyphosate. Of course, everyone knows what glyphosate is, but do you really know how bad it is? Just recently, I posted something on my Instagram. My landscaper, who's doing some work for us at the bottom of the yard, wanted to come around and just spray glyphosate basically all over everything. It was about 100 square meters of our block away from the house. But of course, I didn't really want that. I didn't want glyphosate all over our yard. So I took it on myself to go and pull every single weed and blade of grass in that 100 square meters. And I've still got the blisters to prove it. You guys can see that there if it actually focuses in. If you don't know what glyphosate is, it's an extremely common herbicide that's thought to be incredibly toxic to humans and, well, basically everything. First, let's talk about glyphosate some more though. What is glyphosate? You probably know, but if you don't, it's a chemical compound primarily used as a herbicide, weed killer basically, to control weeds and other unwanted plants. In fact, it's not just a weed killer, it's the weed killer. It was first introduced in the 1970s by Monsanto under the trade name Roundup. You've probably all heard of that. And has since become one of the most widely used weed killers globally. Its popularity is largely due to its effectiveness. It's very effective in killing a broad range of plants. It's relatively low cost, and its compatibility with genetically modified crops that are designed to tolerate glyphosate also help. Now, I'm not going to get into GM crops today. That's going to derail this conversation. But if you want me to do an episode on that, let me know in the comments. I can cover it. Anyway, glyphosate works by inhibiting a specific enzyme known as EPSP synthase, which is essential in this Shikimate pathway. The Shikimate pathway is a metabolic pathway that plants, fungi, and actually some bacteria use to produce necessary amino acids like phenylalanine, tyrosine, and tryptophan. By blocking this pathway, glyphosate prevents plants from synthesizing these proteins, and these proteins are critical to their growth and basically survival, ultimately, of course, leading to their death. It was thought to be actually harmless to humans because the Shikimate pathway, it doesn't exist in humans or animals really of any kind, including humans, of course. But there's actually a growing body of research that indicates that glyphosate still has a very significant effect on human health. One key mechanism is its interaction with the gut microbiome. The human gut microbiome contains bacteria that do actually rely on this Shikimate pathway. As I mentioned, bacteria do have it as well. And glyphosate exposure disrupts this delicate ecosystem in our gut. And studies suggest that this disruption can affect immune function, digestion, and even neurological health. As the gut and the brain, of course, we know, are very closely interconnected. Additionally, glyphosate is metabolized in the body into a compound called AMPA, amino methyl phosphonic acid. It's a mouthful. Both glyphosate and AMPA have been detected in human tissues, including blood and urine, indicating they are not completely eliminated from the body as we once thought. Alarmingly, that wasn't alarming enough, glyphosate and its metabolite have been shown to cross the blood-brain barrier. Now, the blood-brain barrier is basically a protective shield around the brain designed to keep anything bad out. If bad stuff gets into your brain, that's pretty much a bad thing. Once inside, though, these chemicals can contribute to neuroinflammation, oxidative stress, and other processes associated with neurodegenerative conditions like Alzheimer's disease, as well as almost certainly cancer. We know that brain tumors are usually extremely aggressive and they have a very poor survival rate. So glyphosate is a real concern. Unfortunately, glyphosate's toxicity extends well beyond the gut microbiome. We've already mentioned the brain. Research indicates that exposure to glyphosate likely elevates levels of pro-inflammatory cytokines all over the body, including the brain and the peripheral blood and systems all over the body, causing and exacerbating chronic inflammation. Chronic inflammation is a known driver of various diseases, many diseases, in fact, probably all diseases, including, of course, cardiovascular conditions, metabolic disorders, and neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's disease. On top of this, glyphosate has been linked to oxidative stress and oxidative damage, which we know is bad for us and can further impair cellular function and accelerate the process of aging of tissues, including the brain. And it's a big risk for development of cancer. There's also growing concern about glyphosate's potential to chelate essential minerals. What chelate means bind, basically, such as magnesium, zinc, and iron in the plants and soil. This chelation may affect the bioavailability of these nutrients in the human diet, potentially leading to deficiencies that can impair immune function and, of course, cognitive health. And as if all of that wasn't enough, glyphosate has been shown to disrupt hormone function as well. It acts as an endocrine disruptor that almost certainly adversely affects developmental, reproductive, and neurological processes. To explain further how glyphosate affects the brain, let's go back into the study. First off, though, this study was in mice and not in humans. It's important to say that. But given that mice also lack the pathways that humans lack, this Shikimati pathway, we may be able to assume that in this instance, studying mice is somewhat applicable to studying humans. At the very least, I think it really raises a big question over the use of glyphosate. So this groundbreaking study, and I think it is groundbreaking, on glyphosate's long-term effects, I think it's shed light on how this basically really common weed killer actually likely very much accelerates Alzheimer's-like pathology. The study revealed that glyphosate and its metabolite, amino-methylphosphonic acid, I keep saying that wrong, or AMPA, as you already know, I'm going to call it AMPA, it's so much easier, persist in brain tissue months after exposure. Months. This finding raises serious concerns about its potential role in these neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's. The researchers in this paper also discovered that glyphosate exposure significantly increased the levels of amyloid beta, or otherwise known as amyloid, proteins in the brain, particularly the more highly toxic amyloid beta 42 variant. According to the study, 3xTG-AD mice, that's how they named them, exposed to glyphosate exhibited significantly higher amyloid plaque load and plaque size in the hippocampus and cortex, even, this is the scary part, after a 6-month recovery period. 6 months, it was still present. Amyloid beta plaques are one of the key hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease, and their accumulation disrupts communication between neurons, ultimately leading to cognitive decline and development, of course, of dementia. So we really don't want amyloid deposits anywhere in the body, but particularly in the brain. But that's what glyphosate is causing. What's more is that even after this 6-month period of recovery, there was still a ton of amyloid deposits. In addition to amyloid beta, the study found that glyphosate exposure also worsened this thing called tau. Tau, T-A-U, is a protein that stabilizes the structure of neurons. But when it becomes hyperphosphorylated with glyphosate, it forms tangles that disrupt cellular function. And the researchers noted glyphosate-exposed mice showed significantly elevated levels of phosphorylated tau, THR-181 and SCR-396 in both the hippocampus and the cortex. This hyperphosphorylation further contributes to the breakdown of neural networks, which of course are critical for memory and learning, hence worsening the risk of dementia. Neuroinflammation, another critical factor in Alzheimer's disease and Alzheimer's progression, was also found to be exacerbated by glyphosate. Pro and anti-inflammatory cytokines were persistently elevated in both 3xTg-AD and non-TG mice, even 6 months after exposure ended. Chronic inflammation in the brain can accelerate the formation of amyloid beta plaques and tau tangles. We know these are really bad, while impairing the brain's ability to repair itself, which is the second part of dementia. It's insult and then lack of repair. One particularly concerning behavioral change was observed in the glyphosate-exposed mice, and this was increased anxiety-like behavior, such as thigmotaxia, which is staying close to the walls in this Morris water maze. By the way, if you don't know what the Morris water maze is, it's not super relevant, but basically it's this widely used experimental method in neuroscience to study spatial learning, memory, and cognitive function, particularly in animal models like mice and rats. It's basically a behavioral test designed to evaluate how well an animal can learn and remember the location of a hidden platform in a pool of water, which really mimics real-world problem solving and navigation. The anxiety that the mice exhibited was linked to heightened neuroinflammation and damage in the amygdala. This is a brain region involved in the processing fear and anxiety. And according to the study, 3xTg-AD mice exposed to 500 milligrams per kilogram of glyphosate displayed significantly more thigmotaxia, that's anxiety finding the walls and sticking to the walls, compared to the control mice, which didn't get the exposure, indicating severely heightened anxiety. Even more alarming was the persistence of these effects long after the glyphosate exposure had ceased. And this is the really worrying part. The study highlighted that this AMPA, I won't keep saying the full name, was still detectable in cortical brain tissue of those mice after a 6-month recovery washout period, suggesting that glyphosate's metabolites can remain in the brain for a very long time, potentially forever, we don't know, causing long-term damage. These findings underscore the potential for glyphosate to not only exacerbate existing Alzheimer's pathology, but also contribute to the onset of the disease by creating this toxic environment within the brain. As the authors of this study have concluded, exposure to glyphosate elicits long-lasting pathological consequences, with implications for neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's. Let's just take a moment to revisit how neuroinflammation affects the brain. Glyphosate-exposed mice showed significantly elevated levels of pro- and anti-inflammatory cytokines. These are signaling proteins that regulate immune responses in both the brain and blood plasma. These inflammatory markers remained elevated even after that 6-month recovery period. That's the scary part, indicating that the glyphosate's impact is not just short-term, it's profound and long-lasting. The study, of course, observed pro- and anti-inflammatory cytokines were persistently elevated in both groups of mice, even after that 6-month period. I know I've said it a few times, but I think it's a really important point that I do want to hammer home. That glyphosate causes this prolonged neuroinflammation, and it's a critical factor in accelerating Alzheimer's-like pathology, as it creates this toxic environment in the brain that fosters the development of amyloid beta plaques, we've already mentioned, and of course these tau tangles as well. How does neuroinflammation actually harm the brain though? Well, the first thing we've mentioned is these amyloid beta plaques. Pro-inflammatory cytokines like tumor necrosis alpha, TNF-alpha, are known to stimulate the production and accumulation of these amyloid beta plaques. These plaques disrupt neurocommunication, leading to cognitive decline. The study noticed that glyphosate exposure increased amyloidogenic processing, as evidenced by higher levels of the amyloid precursor protein, which is APP, fragments and insoluble amyloid beta in the brain. The next part is tau tangles. Chronic inflammation can also increase tau levels. The tau hyperphosphorylation also forms these tangles associated with Alzheimer's disease. Glyphosate-exposed mice showed significantly high levels of phosphorylated tau at key sites, such as THR-181 and SIR-396, as I've already mentioned, in both the hippocampus and the cortex. These changes impair neuronal stability and lead to cell death. The next part is the blood-brain barrier disruption. Inflammatory cytokines can weaken the blood-brain barrier, allowing those harmful substances, including, of course, glyphosate in this instance, and its metabolite, AMPA, to infiltrate the brain. The study hypothesized that these AMPA crossed the blood-brain barrier and persisted in cortical tissue, contributing to sustained neuroinflammation. So what are some behavioral consequences of neuroinflammation? I think other than the obvious concern about dementia, one of the most striking outcomes of glyphosate exposure in this study, albeit in mice, was the observed increase in the real anxiety-like behaviors, such as thigmotaxia. Anxiety and stress are super common symptoms in Alzheimer's patients and can further impair cognitive function. Of course, anxiety and stress are common in a lot of people, though. The study explained that the increased thigmotaxia in this Morris water maze was linked to the heightened neuroinflammation in the amygdala, the brain region involved in fear and anxiety. This suggests that glyphosate's inflammatory effects and, of course, its metabolite AMPA extend beyond the memory and learning, impacting emotional regulation as well. We know that people with dementia very often get behavioral issues. I think what makes this finding, this study, particularly concerning is the persistence of these effects. Even after glyphosate exposure had been ceased, the study found that inflammatory markers and pathological changes still remained present. The presence of AMPA in the brain long after exposure from glyphosate, AMPA being the metabolite, the breakdown product of glyphosate, suggests that glyphosate's impact on the brain is probably not easily reversible, maybe permanent. The researchers have concluded that exposure to glyphosate elicits long-lasting pathological consequences, raising concerns about its potential role in the development of neurodegenerative diseases. I think that's quite evident from this study. Why, of course, does this matter, though? Well, chronic neuroinflammation doesn't just accelerate existing Alzheimer's disease, it also probably causes it. For individuals with a genetic predisposition or maybe other risk factors for developing Alzheimer's disease, glyphosate exposure could act as this dangerous catalyst, pushing the brain towards irreversible damage. Understanding and addressing these risks, I think, is crucial, as glyphosate continues to be a pervasive part of our environment. I mentioned already earlier at the start, the landscape gardener that wants to come around to spray pretty much my whole block with glyphosate. AMPA and its long-term impact is also very significant. This is a very concerning finding from this study, and this is the role of AMPA, aminomethylphosphonic acid. It gets easier each time you say it. This is this major metabolite of glyphosate. So while glyphosate itself is known to have very harmful effects, its breakdown product, AMPA, appears to be just as toxic, if not more so, when it comes to long-term brain health. AMPA's persistence in the brain is also particularly concerning. AMPA was detectable in the brains of mice exposed to glyphosate even after a 6-month period with no glyphosate exposure. This persistence raises serious questions about how glyphosate and its metabolites are metabolized and clearly, or not clearly as the case may be, are cleared or not cleared from the body. The researchers again reported AMPA was present in the cortical brain tissue in both 50 milligrams per kilogram and the 500 milligram per kilogram glyphosate groups, highlighting its ability to cross the blood-brain barrier and remain there for months, even at low doses. The prolonged presence of AMPA in the brain is particularly concerning because it may contribute to this long-term pathological changes observed in the study, such as the increased amyloid beta and, of course, the tau tangle pathology. What's really concerning here is also the glyphosate-resistant GM crops. I'm not really going to get into that, but they're spraying glyphosate on everything, and we are eating it. How does all of this get into our body though? Well, as I just said, it's ingested through food, it's in water and environmental exposure. It's getting into the gut and getting into our body. This study has showed that the metabolites cross the blood-brain barrier due to its small size and chemical properties. And once in the brain, once again, AMPA triggers neuroinflammation, amyloid beta deposit, and tau tangles. AMPA, like glyphosate, also generates reactive oxygen species, or ROS, leading to oxidative damage in brain cells. Oxidative stress and oxidative damage is a well-known factor in all sorts of chronic diseases, but particularly neurodegenerative diseases. They can also disrupt metal-ion balance, this chelation we spoke about. AMPA has been shown to chelate those essential metal ions, such as calcium, zinc, and magnesium. And these ions are critical for proper neuronal function and stability. Now, the study's authors speculated that AMPA may chelate heavy metals in the brain, potentially contributing to the neurotoxicity associated with Alzheimer's disease. By promoting amyloid beta aggregation and tau tangles, AMPA also disrupts the normal communication pathways between the neurons, impairing learning and memory generation and recall, possibly also affecting behavior. So all of this said, what are the implications for human health? After all, this study was in mice. But while this study focused on mice, I think it's probably also applicable to humans, as we both lack that shikimate pathway. I think these findings raise serious concerns for humans, especially as we're the ones putting glyphosate on everything. The fact that glyphosate and AMPA has been detectable in human urine and blood, we know it has the potential to cross over into blood-brain barrier, and it can also persist for a very long time. I think there's really serious consequences of using glyphosate or being exposed to glyphosate. We obviously need further investigation into its clearance mechanisms and long-term health effects. As glyphosate continues to be such a ubiquitous presence in our environment, understanding its impact, including the role of its breakdown products like AMPA, I think is absolutely crucial for public health. I think this evidence calls for, honestly, far greater regulation, much better safety assessments, and far more comprehensive studies to determine how exposure might be mitigated. I think the evidence is pretty clear. Glyphosate exposure has profound and long-lasting effects on the brain, from accelerating Alzheimer's-like pathology to triggering chronic inflammation, cognitive decline, and anxiety-like behavior. This recent study highlights that even after a significant recovery period, in this case 6 months, glyphosate and its metabolite AMPA were persistent in the body and the brain, particularly driving those harmful changes that may contribute to the development and progression of neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's disease, as well as potentially brain cancer. These findings challenge the long-held assumption that glyphosate is perfectly safe and is harmless to humans. While originally believed to target only plant pathways, it's now pretty evident it's also affecting animals, of course, including humans. And as I said, these effects are particularly concerning given the herbicide's widespread use and its presence in our environment, food, and even drinking water. It's even been found in human breast milk. Scary. As rates of Alzheimer's disease and other neurological conditions continue to rise, understanding and mitigating potential risk factors like glyphosate, I think, is crucial. This isn't just about agriculture or environmental policies. It's about protecting basic human public health. If glyphosate can exacerbate conditions like Alzheimer's disease in animal models, what can it do in humans? And I think it raises serious questions about its impact on us, particularly in populations already at risk for cognitive decline. So while this study adds to a growing body of research suggesting that glyphosate is harmful, and I can already hear detractors saying, yeah, but surely we can have a little bit and it's okay. Well, no, actually, I don't think we can. They showed the low doses also still persisted. The truth is, we don't know, but I think it really underscores this need for urgent further research. There's a few key questions that remain. How much glyphosate exposure is too much? Personally, I think probably 0 is too much. How can we reduce its presence in our food and the environment? I mean, the obvious thing is stop using it. And what measures can individuals take to minimize their own risk? I think as a society, we must start to advocate for stricter regulations, better safety testing, and increased awareness of glyphosate's potential dangers. Now, you can put glyphosate with almost any other word here. On an individual level, I think choosing organic foods, which are not going to have glyphosate, filtering your drinking water, and just like me with my weeds in the back garden, just being mindful of these chemicals in your own backyard. These are small, but I think very meaningful steps that we can all take to reduce our exposure. So glyphosate is everywhere, but that doesn't mean that we should just accept its risks and keep using it. As new research continues to emerge, I think it's time to really reconsider the role that this chemical plays in our lives. The connection between glyphosate and brain health, as well as everything else, I just think it's something that we just can't afford to ignore. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into glyphosate's impact on the brain and dementia. If you've enjoyed this episode and you want me to do more like it, looking at studies, let me know in the comments because I really want to make content that you guys want to watch. Make sure you check out themeatmedic.com and join the community. And thank you guys. I'll see you in the next episode.